Hey everybody, welcome to Regulatory Joe. I'm Joe Boyle, president of ClearFile, and I'm thrilled to introduce our newest guest, Jennifer Berman, Chief Legal Officer of Lumelight and former CEO of MZQ Consulting. Jennifer, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Joe. Thanks so much for having me. Well, as you mentioned, I am the Chief Legal Officer here at Lumelight, an ERISA attorney by training and entrepreneur. So I was the co-founder and CEO of MZQ Consulting before we joined the Lumelight family, and just thrilled to be here today with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it was a pleasure meeting you in person a few weeks back. It was my first time attending the SPBA conference, which had a heavy focus in benefit administration, specifically lots of speakers in the TPA space. What should TPAs be focusing on for entering 2026?
Well, I would say that entering 2026, obviously lots of things going on, and I'm always thinking about the compliance angle. But certainly there was a lot of conversation in SPBA this year about AI and how to look at artificial intelligence and really incorporating it and figuring out how to use it as a tool within your businesses. Let's talk about claims processes, right? So
Sure.
that is as basic as it gets. ERISA establishes those claims processes, and it really is about, setting up and establishing those repeatable processes and making sure that we're doing them over and over again. And there are elements of it where tools like AI are fantastic. So I was involved in a conversation, different side of the industry, on just how boring that really is when you get into doing it day to day, over and over again. And that operational excellence is, when done correctly, mind-numbingly tedious. And yet, the single most important thing any TPA or really any operation can do. And putting in that discipline is as hard as it gets.
Yeah, operational excellence. I love that. And that's a nice message to the industry. That's something that TPAs can measure. You can set goals for performance, for improvement, and reset those for advancement, whether it's against your top competitors or entering new markets or even new geographies. Far too often, compliance and the complex work that we do gets confused with being highly administrative in nature when it should be a core part of a company's strategy. You had cited a number of key educational points to the conference about how TPAs struggle with training, but specifically training to the groups that they're onboarding, and how can we improve TPA literacy in the marketplace?
Training is an excellent point. Time spent really understanding the intricacies of the job, right? If we're going to focus on finding tools to do the mundane, then we're going to be using people for those hard pieces of the job. And so then it becomes, how do we make sure the people have the discernment, have the knowledge base for those more complex pieces? And so then there's two parts. Our vets need to figure out knowledge transfer, and how am I going to make sure that knowledge transfer takes place? How am I going to develop those curriculums, those pieces, to make sure that we're developing those tracks to bring new people into the industry, to help them learn and develop and know what they're going to need to do, so that we have that worker of the future who is AI proof, as it were, and really has the knowledge base, because we certainly have those industry veterans, but they're not going to be useful if they don't figure out how to effectively transfer that knowledge. And then the reverse is true of those new employees. The ability to cut and paste or follow that routine procedure is not going to help them be successful in the future. So how are they going to acquire the knowledge and get to that veteran status and that really expert status faster and more effectively?
I'm so glad you brought this up, because we estimate, in terms of onboarding, whether it's an employee or a group or anybody starting something new, we estimate anywhere from 12 to 18 months to really get a harness on any net new process. So based on your benefit package or your benefit design, that's what makes it so hard to actually go out there and have custom reviews ongoing, in whether it's a 1-hour training session or an hour and a half or 2 sessions. Where do you draw the line between overtraining or that retention of knowledge? And in your opinion, do you think it's possible to have standardized group training across the board for all groups? Or is the complexity of each benefit package a group is it so unique that really you need to develop these individual group trainings for each renewal?
So I think we need to be really thinking about what we're training people on. because I don't think
Sure.
we need to be training people on, this is the copay and this is the deductible and this is the, items that are excluded for ABC Inc. I think we need to be training people on this is what copays are and this is what deductibles are and this is what exclusions are and this is how we need to think about these things. Because then our tools can know these are the specifics for these groups. And then we need to train people how to figure it out, how to use the tools and query the tools for the copays, the deductibles, the exclusions, right? So how are we thinking about education? How are we thinking about what we need to train people on? We need to teach people how to find the answers and make sure the answers are appropriately programmed. So what is it that people need to know? They need to know how to find answers and then use the technology to store the answers.
It's almost like the concept of training the trainer, right? So we can, as a TPA or, even from a Lumelight perspective, provide the benefit package, administer the benefits, but then actually training somebody from an employer group, having somebody at the group side, a leader that actually will retain the knowledge, develop core business processes or other. It was even brought up different distribution channels of how training is delivered. Whether it's physical training in person, where you fly to an office and have a classroom full of representatives or agents or so on, or virtual. Is that effective?
Exactly. So training people on things like, let's talk about a call center. Let's train our call center reps and spend the time training them on things like how to recognize different personalities when they call. Here's how we're going to de-escalate a situation. Here's how we're going to interact and know if the right way to have the conversation with somebody is to figure out how their day went before we interact with them versus, okay, this person just needs to answer and they want to get off the phone with me as soon as possible. They don't necessarily need to know the detail of every plan and how it works because that is where the new tools and where the AI can pull that information. But we can't replace the ability to understand what's going on and how with this person. So what can we replace with technology and what can't we replace?
I think that's having that first look or stepping back to look at that is huge. Member behavior is one thing, but then having adequate stand-up time for your agents to actually have the training, 3, 4 to 6 weeks, to have the talking points, to have that knowledge base, to actually take the call, eliminating first call resolution, to eliminate repeat call-ins for the same reason or same issues. So having that is going to only improve brand recognition for TPAs in the marketplace and also grow your business and retain your members. I think towards the end of the conference, they had cross topics about, from an ERISA perspective, level funded products versus fully insured products and what that means for PBMs versus TPAs, because we do know from like a licensure perspective, as PBMs are still offering their pharmaceuticals and drugs that it could be administered by way of a TPA, some PBMs are also being required to be licensed as TPAs in certain states, even if they're not intending to process claims or other. Are you seeing different consolidations of different marketplaces, or should TPAs be, following the PBM industry as being mutually exclusive?
I think it's an interesting question, and it's a state law question as much as anything, and I don't know that the states entirely understand the difference between what folks are doing in each space, right? It's a moving target, so there's a whole line of cases that are confusing and difficult to understand in the PBM world and the intersection of pharmacy benefit management and ERISA, rising all the way up to the Supreme Court, and we got, a circuit split and all the rest of it, and what is a plan, and what can the states regulate versus what can't they regulate. ERISA preemption is still a little bit more clear outside of the pharmacy world than inside of the pharmacy world. We've got all of these questions brewing as to what the states can and can't regulate relative to pharmacy. We're starting to see some bleed over into the TPA space relative to that. It's Rutledge and all of the cases coming out of it that are, we're starting to see some creep, and, the more aggressive regulators are starting to say, maybe we can do this, and maybe we can start chipping away at preemption. To the extent that lay people who aren't legal experts are confused, you're right to be confused, because the legal experts, we are also confused. So don't think you're wrong if you're sitting there scratching your head and saying, what's happening? I sit and scratch my head and say, what's happening? My peers sit and scratch their heads and saying, what's happening?
It's a reinforcement of how complex, and like you said, on an individual state by state basis, everything is unique and it's not one size fits all. So from a resourcing perspective, I know it's complex keeping up with all these state changes, whether it's TPA, ERISA, PBM, or other. So as these are colliding and as states are regulating, sometimes in some cases over-regulating, from an ERISA perspective, do you think that there will be net new requirements that will start to govern these processes more on a state level basis, or would you anticipate more on a federal level, ERISA may have more strength going into 2026?
I do not think that ERISA will be stronger on a federal level. I think that the risk is that ERISA will be weaker on a federal level, not stronger. So, I mean, that is sort of the existential risk that practitioners are facing and that we're working on trying to strengthen ERISA at the federal level, right? So we've got all of these state regulators who are pecking at ERISA. And those of us who practice at the federal level are actively working to protect ERISA preemption from state regulation, both in the pharmacy world and more generally. And then you've got the 50 states and all of the work that you do, Joe, who are working their ways and trying to regulate in firm regard. We certainly would like to see ERISA preemption reaffirmed, but there's not like an active movement to strengthen it beyond attempts to push away, attempts to erode what exists, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, and sure. And I'm learning a ton right now too, just from an industry standpoint. How do you think the government shutdown, if at all, will have a lesser or more impact on what we're talking about today?
Well, I mean, one huge piece of the shutdown is it meant the rulemakers aren't working. So, there's a rulemaking agenda, and that rulemaking agenda gets delayed by the shutdown, period, full stop. That is a piece of it. So all of the rules that we're waiting for, and we're waiting for a lot of rules, are delayed. Then we have enforcement. And enforcement goes in both directions. There will be some who say, oh, like we get a reprieve because they're not actively enforcing. That's only partially true. Like, yes, some of the enforcement people aren't at work right now, but then that also creates an enforcement backlog that comes in like a whirlwind when they get back to work. So you have to be prepared for that. What does this mean for me if I'm an employer or, a service provider who's, got concerns relative to enforcement? That pendulum swings in both directions.
I'm so glad you brought this up too, because that's another valuable message for our listeners here. Being a proactive organization is better than being reactive. Don't let your guard down in terms of what's coming, because that pendulum, may swing right back. So it'd probably be wise for TPAs groups to have dedicated resources to some degree on staff, even during the government shutdown, that are still actively monitoring state mandates, following policy development, and even tracking through the bill trackers that we have. If you don't have a technology on hand, I recommend you develop a manual process to actually follow these bills. And would you recommend probably establishing a work group or some type of project team to combat this when it does come to fruition?
Absolutely. And, this is not meant to seem didactic, but just as a gentle reminder, only the federal government shut down, they can come back with a vengeance. And there's funding issues, so they will come back looking to make up for lost time relative to the need to enforce and make some of that money back as well.
Very true. Yep. I mean, the bottom line is pretty black and white too, and I know it's budget season, so we'll see how the market reacts. Jennifer, we've covered a lot of information here today, and I know you mentioned it's hard to have that crystal ball and look into the future, but looking ahead about 5 years from now, it was quoted that estimated up to 3 out of 4 full-time employees will be enrolled into self-funded coverage in the next 5 years as opposed to fully insured. I could argue that point with the fully insured work I do, especially with the ACA, IFP, and small groups. If you had one big takeaway, what would you want the market to hear?
So I think that my takeaway is that there is tremendous opportunity in the marketplace still for innovation and for building a true stack. So we've had sort of a business cycle where there was a big focus for a while on best of breed, and now we're starting to oscillate back towards developing integrated benefits programs. And that is really where there's the largest opportunity, particularly for the independent TPA. And so figuring out a way to really zero in on and develop an integrated program with a vendor stack that provides that value is where the most opportunity is in the years ahead.
That's awesome. So a true end-to-end solution that's not fractional or bifurcated from one another, but really building that one-stop shop. I can't wait to see it come to life as we kind of go through the next couple of years. You touched on a number of products in the Lumelight family, but anything else you'd like to share just about any projects or items you're working on for your customers through the next year?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm most excited about is sort of the most recent additions to the Lumelight family, or BMI audit services and Consilva. So our ability to get involved in dependent audits are really exciting to me. This is an area of rampant non-compliance and so much risk and such direct ROI to health plans. So it's super, super common that you end up with these folks who enroll grandma or their niece or their nephew or their best friend on the health plan for all sorts of compelling reasons, but from a fiduciary perspective, they really just can't be on the plan. And having a trusted partner to help administer those audits and make sure you've got the right people on the plan and the wrong people not on the plan is of tremendous value. So that's probably what I'm most excited about here right now, in addition to ClearFile, of course. Of course. Very excited.
Thank you. No, that's awesome. And BMI, I mean, talk about complex in terms of dependent eligibility and audits. Thank you for all the work that you're doing with them. I think as we're coming to an end too, may get a number of questions from TPAs, PBMs, organizations of the like. Where can we find you?
So lumelight.com is our website. lumelight.com is the website. And you can also email me directly. I am jberman@lumelight.com, BERMAN.
Well, Jennifer, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I hope our listeners out here learn a lot from your expertise. And I'm looking forward to joining SPBA early next year and also the fall. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. Give us a like, give us a share, and we'll see you all next time.